welcome to the eLearning Success Summit from LMSPulse.com. My name is Stephen Laddick, and I'm the director at LMS Pulse. We put together this summit because we know over at LMS Pulse that there's an incredible amount of complexity and change going on in the e-learning space. Complexity is coming from, what kind of technology are you using? What's your pedagogy that you're using? Where are you meeting your learners? And change is only increasing in how rapid it's coming, but also, with the COVID crisis happening right now, change is imminent for almost everyone. And that's just, compounded by the fact that technology changes every day, right? There's new add-ons, there's new plugins, there's new requirements, there's new, whole new systems that come out every day. Again, where we even meet our learners is changing every day. So when I was going to school, when I was in the corporate space, we actually went and sat down, we used papers and pencils. But now everybody's got a mobile phone and you got to meet them there. So we wanted to bring together experts to try to cut through this noise and talk about how do you create learner success in this environment with some real tangible and actionable items and goals. So in this summit, I'm extremely excited to have Mr. Gavin Hendrick, who is the founder of Brookfield Education Labs. Hello, Gavin. How are you today?
Hi there. How are you?
I'm wonderful.
We're doing fine here. We're based in Dublin. It's a beautiful day outside and birds are chirping. Great.
It's beautiful. That's fantastic. Gavin, you are known to many people in the audience right now through your work through Moodle. But like I do in all of these summit sessions, rather than trying to botch up your history and your bio, why don't you spend a few seconds telling us about who you are and what you're doing today?
Okay, so my name is Gavin Hendrick, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Brookfield Education Labs. And as mentioned, yes, I've worked in the Moodle space now for, I think 15 years. Initially started off working with some Moodle partner in Dublin, Innovation Solutions, and worked with them for quite a few years. And then worked for Remote Learner, who was a Moodle partner at the time over in Canada. And since then, I've set up a consultancy here in Dublin, been working with a lot of large corporates, universities, and small local providers. And for 3.5 years, I was the business development manager for Moodle HQ, which was a really great privilege to be able to work with the central project and assist them. And I sort of worked with the Moodle Partner Network, part of that. And my background is a mix between technology, sort of education, and business. So it's that sort of triple mix, really, both from helping people with their teaching and curriculum design, coming up with solutions, but also understanding the whole business side and the commerciality of it. So our current business, when we left Moodle last year, we set up a new startup, which went through an accelerator here in Dublin called MDRC, which helps prime a business for their future. And what we're initially focusing on is around the accessibility in online learning, and specifically with Moodle. So it's something that it's a big challenge for people, and we're trying to help them both find what problems they have, help them fix them, and then future-proof to stop those problems happening in the future.
Awesome. That is, and it's a perfect segue into what you want to talk about today, your newfound passion of accessibility. So why don't we go ahead and share your slides and take us in.
So what I want to start with is really about what accessibility is. Accessibility is often mixed up with usability and also inclusion, but actually they're really closely related aspects. And what that means is that when you think about having everybody able to access your site and your content, be it through the web or their mobile, or even a mobile app, you think about, well, it has to be usable, and it does, but usable by everybody. It has to have inclusion, so everyone, no matter what their specific needs might be, and whether they need to use a screen reader, or whether they need to be able to have text magnified or change the colors, so they might be colorblind. So when you take these three terms together, it really tackles all of that area. So they are very tied in. And it is about making a system that is as usable as possible for everyone, not just for some. So it's not just catering for those who have a special need. It's catering for everybody. And that's where it really comes into when you take down what accessibility means to people. So it's about availability. So it's available for them to use on whatever device they happen to have. But inclusion, no matter what needs they have, and that's not a learning need, it's just a usage need as well. So some people might not be able to listen to audio, so you should have transcripts. And I don't know, but I hope you're going to have transcripts and subtitles available for all these videos. And then you've got usability, that they should be able to interact with it. You should be able to meet the standard, and there are international standards and also more recent directives in Europe about how a web page and how content should be usable and should meet accessibility. And that's WCAG, and then you've got 508 in the States and so on. Different areas have different standards. But it should also be predictable. And what does that mean? Well, when you're navigating a site or a course or something, it has that structure, it has that flow. And if a student is in 20 different modules or 10 different modules in a course, that flow should be somewhat similar in each. Otherwise, they're having to relearn a different navigation structure, and it's not predictable. So it's good to have predictability both in language and then in structure and in navigation. And it's about reducing negative impact on disabilities on access. And if you make it available that it is predictable and that you have approached all of these other issues, then there shouldn't be a negative impact, because everyone should be able to access it in the same way, if they so choose. And sometimes it isn't even just accessing it in the exact same way, but accessing it in a way that works for them. So sometimes you might have two different types of access. And
so my guess would be that you know, one of the reasons why this is a passion for you is because through your work as, you know, sort of in the global space of online education, you haven't seen a whole lot of organizations or higher ed institutions tackle this sufficiently. But is that a good guess?
Yeah, I mean, it's technical, and I'm going to come to that later. But part of the challenge is that in a large organization, often people don't even get trained on the technology. So I'm talking about Moodle. You might have 1,000 lecturers, of which maybe 100 have gone through some Moodle training or LMS training, and then maybe 50 a lot. And then that's not enough. It's 1/20th of the organization. And then you have, well, how many of them have gone through the technical stuff about what accessibility means? And that's often can be less again. So they might know about it, but they mightn't know what they're doing is right or wrong. And it's just about training. It's often one of those things that people don't put emphasis on. And I've seen more in the corporate a focus on accessibility than in the higher ed space, with some exceptions. There are some universities, especially here in Ireland and in the UK, that I've seen that have really put accessibility to the fore and have adopted universal design for learning philosophy, which really, I'm not going to go into today, but it encompasses part of the accessibility, but it's beyond that. It's really taking into account that both the teaching and the assessment should be multimodal. It should be multiple options for a student to be able to engage and get assessed, depending on their particular needs. So it's, I would like to see more having it, but over the last few years, there's been a huge rise in this, and just recently there's been an EU directive in the last few years, which is sort of setting the scene and setting a certain bar that people have to meet now, not just for the applications, but for the content.
Awesome.
And when you think about, well, how many people actually have a disability? Well, this is from the 2016 census, and they're not held every year. So you can see here that about 1 in 7 have stated that they have a disability. And not everyone either knows they have a disability, and not everyone will always state it either. So there's different statistics around Europe between 1 in 7 and 1 in 6 have a permanent or a long-term disability. But it can also be people with temporary disabilities. And it isn't just physical. Like, not everyone walks around with an arrow on their head saying, hey, I've got a disability. And you do see comments on things like Twitter about when people go to use what are classed as disabled toilets or whatever in a hotel or a bar or whatever, but they don't look disabled, and they might get someone saying, hey, what are you going in there for? You know, people shouldn't have to self-declare necessarily. So this percentage, although it's what we have, might not be as accurate. So this is some of the surveys and statistics that are out there. And when you start looking at the actual numbers, it's big. I mean, even if you are looking at 1 in 6 numbers, that's nearly 14 million people in the UK. That's a lot. And in Ireland, it's over 640,000. I mean, these are big numbers, and across your 80 million. That's a lot of people who actually have said that they've got a disability. Okay? So you really do need to think and go, okay, so if I want to be inclusive, I need to be doing things in a way that makes it possible for those to be able to engage and learn on my platform and consume the content. And it's not just about the content, it's also sometimes about actual how you go about assessing it. So what's the kind of assessment? Are you doing a time pressure assessment? And what if there's some people who don't react well to that time pressure assessment? Okay. So there's things like that. And then these are it's just some statistics from AHEAD, which is an organization in Ireland. And this was looking at postgraduate and the undergraduate totals. So you can see it is constantly now, people are feeling more comfortable about reporting. So those numbers are going up.
And those, not only reporting, but I mean, is this related also just to population increase? I mean, I'm sure some people, like myself included in the room, are just like, why is it growing in this way over time? Is that this would just be expected, but then it would have an additional bump because people are more comfortable and it's more acceptable to report? Or
I think also now that there's much more technical accommodations or technical supports available to people with a disability, that now when they report it, they know that there's an expectation of it being supported. Them being supported.
Okay.
Better. So it's probably a mix of many things. It isn't, the Irish population hasn't done it like that. Otherwise,
yeah, I was just going to say, you guys have really been at it, haven't you?
Oh, that's bold. That's very bold. But then this is, for example, some of the different disabilities that people have mentioned. You can see here that it is quite diverse, and some of these clearly, again, they don't have an arrow on their head. I mean, there's a friend of mine who has tinnitus, and so I didn't know that until he told me, because he can hear me. But when he watches video at our TV at home, he turns on subtitles to turn down the sound, so it doesn't a loud bang. You know the way TV can change volume.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So he turns it off because it can trigger it. So, but yet, nobody would know unless they've been told about it. So it is important to understand that it's catering for everybody, not just for people with a disability. So I mentioned that EU directive, and this is quite important to consider because you do have a huge amount of standards and different laws around the world, and you have laws around disability and ensuring that you could provide an accommodation. So if someone said, hey, I need this in a different format, you would provide it in that format. And that's been there. But then different laws have had different levels of severity involved. And the EU directive is trying to create more of a standard. So the directive is obviously from quite a few years ago now, really. But it does, when they bring out directives, they do give a time for adoption and different timeframes for when things have to happen. So, and what it is about, this one is specifically about public sector bodies, but it's also when they buy in services from others. So like if they have a platform used within their context of their organization, it should be accessible. The content on it should be accessible, and it should build accessible content and so on. So if a university's public sector body is using a commercial LMS, then even though it isn't their platform and they're buying it in, they still need to make sure that it is acceptable and is accessible in that respect. And it's an interesting one, well, what's the responsibility? And it should be a contract requirement, because what happens here now is that it's about websites, content, and the mobile app as well, so that it should all be accessible. So if we go through, the initial timeline was websites created after the 2018 deadline have to be accessible by that date. You know, it was great. So as of now, any new websites, any new implementations of LMS, deployment of a copy of an LMS, whatever it is, it's supposed to be accessible right now. The content should be accessible right now. And that isn't something that's equivalent. I think virtually all of the European countries, and including the UK, have done a really good job on their standards, have implemented these. Ireland, I don't think have implemented it in law yet, but they'll get there soon enough. And existing websites from before that, basically the deadline on the 23rd of September this year. So there is a bit of a rush, and that's one of the timings that we're looking to work with and help people in this area, especially those who are using Moodle, but we are working with some other organizations as well.
So So has everybody in the room here who's got an online platform or an organization, did they all just sort of take a collective gulp because that's 6 months away?
Yeah, but this is just Europe.
Okay.
In Australia and America and everywhere else, they've had this requirement before, and this is a bit like GDPR in some ways.
Okay.
It suddenly, most of GDPR was the law for 20 odd years. Okay. It wasn't new. Basically,
I did not know that. You just threw some knowledge on the table for me there.
Yeah. Oh well. I mean, data protection was pretty much always collected the minimum amount of data for the minimum amount of time, shared with the minimum amount of people. And obviously, the laws were more detailed than that, but that was it. GDPR ramped that up and included huge penalties. And this is very similar, where it's basically going, now this is the minimum standard, and these are the penalties, and this is a mandatory reporting and collection of reports and so on. So it's a little bit different in that respect. And by going through public sector, since they buy from so many, the private sector then has to follow suit anyway. But as I said, corporates, for their own training, often did accessibility out of requirement more than out of sort of maybe just thinking it was a great idea. So if you were creating a video and that person, and there's people who needed to listen to it, let's say while they were sitting at a till in a shop, they had a laptop beside them or a computer, and they wanted to do a little bit of CPD, continual professional development, while they were working and there was nobody around, they could watch a video, but they'd have to have the sound off, so they would need subtitles. Or if they were on a very noisy factory floor. So they understood this needs to be usable by people in all situations. Okay, so the corporates were already doing this because of need and recognizing that universal approach. So this is increasing that into the public sector, but then also mobile app, they've got an extra bit of time as well.
Okay.
And this is the interesting part. It's about that the member states have to monitor, they have to look at the compliance of the websites and the apps, and then they have to introduce some level of a methodology around monitoring, and then there has to be a level of penalties as well for people who don't comply. And part of that is also having an accessibility statement. I mean, I know it's on your website, you have a privacy statement. And those privacy statements are always a work in progress, okay? Well, the same as having an accessibility statement. You should have a statement stating, well, this is how we go about doing things. You can use all of these tools to change stuff. So letting people know that you don't hard code the side of all the fonts. All of your images are properly alt tagged, etc. So you can outline all of your accessibility stuff, and you can give them then, if you find something that isn't accessible, here's how you report it to us. And then here's an interesting one. You actually have to give them the equivalent of the phone number of the local police station. But in this case, it's whoever is going to be the enforcement in your country. You have to give them the link to how the enforcement action is taken against you. But it's literally like a criminal walking around handing out the local police station phone number, going, if you catch me stealing something, you can phone these. And it's really being upfront and going, we're trying to be accessible. If we're not, let us know and we'll fix it. And then if we don't, these are the guys that you complain to.
Sure, and that's just, if we're just being sort of adults in the room, right? I mean, that's the mature way to go about it. It's like, look, we're trying. If we don't have something yet, or you really need something, let us know. Give us a chance to fix it, right? And then if we're not responsive, okay, then there should be a penalty attached. So makes sense.
What's the purpose of the directive? The purpose of the directive is that everyone suddenly adopts this culture of having their website as usable as possible for everybody. It isn't about creating really non-interactive, simplified content at all. It's actually about creating good content that's usable by everyone, and not just some. That's really what it's about.
Inclusiveness, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing. It is about being inclusive. That accessibility statement, I know that Kent in the UK, they came up with a nice philosophy and approach to doing their accessibility statements. There's lots of really good stuff online there. But the idea is that you want to have a plain language statement. You say it in English. This is how, or in text, and non-technical, that this is how it works. Okay, this is what you can do. We can also give technical stuff. You can say, well, these are the tools that we've tested with, and you should be able to use, like with screen readers you've tested with, and so on. And then if you have any issues, you can give them a list of any of the known issues. We know that these aren't there yet, And if you need a copy of that particular PDF that isn't working, let us know. So you can, or that we're working on this and we hope to have it done by a certain date. So it's about providing this accessible in language, not just in technicality. Because that was that accessibility, so about having the predictability. But if you are just going, okay, so I need to start tackling accessibility, what do you do? Well, the first thing you need to know is, where are you? If I was to ask you, how accessible are your websites? Your first step is going to be, okay, well, how do I find out? And what you're going to need to do is to start off first. What you're going to need to do is to start off and actually check the website and the content. There's going to be a set of basic checks, and you can do what's called indicative checking, where you can just grab 1 or 2 pages and see what the general problems are. That works for websites. It doesn't work so well for an LMS, and one of the reasons for that is that on your website, I don't know, how many people create content, enter content into your LMS Pulse website?
We have a group of people that do that, but sure, do we?
3 or 4?
3 or 4. And so we have an editor process that they go through, but.
Okay. So that seems sensible. That's 3 or 4 people creating it on your site. So if you were to even do 2 or 3 pages, really, you'd probably get a general idea of what your issues are. However, now go to 1,000, 2,000 teachers creating content in a university, each one building their own courses, possibly 2 different layouts, and all with different levels of knowledge of what LMS they're using, of accessibility standards or not. So suddenly, just searching even 5 or 10 courses isn't going to really give you an idea of what the overall issues are. Because you might randomly hit on people who are really good, or you might randomly hit on people who are less good. So these indicative tests may not be as useful for you to find out what all of your particular issues are. So you might need to automate the tests across all the platforms, and there's a few solutions out there that can do that, and some consultants. And it's an interesting question that people always go, hey, do I do this myself? Do I engage with people, or do I just outsource it completely? So you've got your basic checks that you can do, and your detailed checks, because not all the standards are like black and white. Some of them are subjective. Okay, so one of those would be that you shouldn't have a link that opens in a new page without telling the person. That's how do you go about telling them? So I noticed on your site you've lots of underscore blank links. One of the things I was going to mention to you afterwards. So you shouldn't do that unless you have text in the link text itself saying that it's opening in a new page.
I'm going to get schooled, I think, through this entire presentation.
I wasn't meaning to. I'm sorry.
No.
Okay.
I love it. We're here to learn, right? So I'm learning as much as everybody else on the summit. One question: if you go back there, give me a set. And I apologize if I'm stealing any thunder for the rest of your presentation. Okay, for a website like LMS Pulse, which I run, an indicative test might be sufficient because, as you said, we have only a number of contributors, and we'll have a relatively easy process to figure out where we're at. But if I'm looking, if I'm an institution, especially if I'm a large higher ed institution or a large corporate, what's a test like that cost? I mean, are we talking thousands of dollars? What kind of investment in terms of time and resources and money are we looking at here?
It depends. So you can grab a tool off. There's a few free ones that will just check your web page. But then that checks your theme, the platform you're using, the layout, and loads of other things as well. So you can there's a few of them online which are free. But then if you were to engage with a third-party company to do an indicative test for you, and there's some really good consultants and companies out there. We work with a few of them. And that could cost you anywhere between $10,000 and $20,000 US dollars. It really depends on how much and how complicated. You might say you have 10 different page layouts, they might have to check each one. So it really depends, but it's real money. But when you engage with accessibility experts doing indicative tests, they go really deep. They do a significant amount of testing. They'll be testing with people who have disabilities, testing with screen readers. And again, it's time, And when you engage with services, you pay for the time involved. So yes, you could use a free tool to get your own sort of very simple test and go, okay, yeah, we got a problem. Let's bring in some big guns here and really know how deep the problem is. And it is that when you use WordPress, for example, there are some themes that say they're accessible, and they mostly are. But then as soon as you let an editor in there and they add an image in and put in a wrong alt text or don't, or they create links that link off to a new web page and an opening a tab or whatever it will be, you've already then that's wrong. So you've already started making mistakes. So but it is about how much you want to do, and not everyone will be able to spend a huge amount of money on this. And obviously, within the legislations, there's a whole burden issue that if people don't have the time and budget to be able to do things, but they can pay, may not necessarily too much effort for us to tackle this going backward, but maybe going forward. And,
the compliance is inaccessible, Gavin.
but and then they're going to really have to justify that, because if they try and say that and it's untrue, then they'll get kicked back on that. Anyway, but I think everyone should be having it accessible. Otherwise, you're literally cutting off access to, whether it's their customer base, student base, staff base, of at least 1/6 of the population, and that's something which I think is a challenge. So, or it's a challenge worth tackling. But then once you know where you are, okay, now you need to be able to plan and fix it. So you might have internal issues that your platform you're using is just not accessible, isn't designed accessibly. And just because it has a feedback now in the States, you've got this thing called a voluntary product accessibility test. So you've got this document that says, hey, these are the tests we've done, or this is the methodology we go about. Just because they have that or don't have that, that doesn't mean too much, apart from they have done some testing at some point in time. And whether they've done it internally or externally, that may or may not mean anything, because again, you do it externally, they'll ask for a set of workflows to test. So you'll know that at least those basic ones are there. But then you also might have your content, whether you create it yourself, whether you download it from some repository somewhere, whether you buy it, or whether you pay for embedding it from another platform. Then you start moving it towards where it's external. So you might have then, if you're embedding it, then their platform or linking to it, their platform has to be accessible, and then their content within their platform has to be accessible. So you can start tackling all these issues, identify where they are, and then go, right, how do we go about fixing them? Okay? And are some of these things that you can automate fix, and some of these things you have to look at and make judgment calls on, or some of these things that are going to be not just subjective, but require manual intervention. And then some of them could be debatable, i.e. the subjective one. So after you plan, then you're going to say, okay, we've started fixing, doing all of that, let's get our accessibility statement out there, and then you keep it up to date. So after you improve everything, you keep on going back and editing it, adding more detail about your testing, about your compliance level. And it isn't a one-off thing. It's like your privacy statement. These are living documents that as you do more stuff with more data, you add that to the privacy part. As you do more stuff with content, or maybe include more platforms that you use, you're going to have an accessibility statement as well. And when you're using third parties, you should be looking for an accessibility statement for them. Don't forget that as soon as you start putting stuff into their platform, now you're altering their accessibility status of that system. Okay? And that's one of the things I want to get to as well. Then you have to plan for the future. So let's say you've found your issues, you fix them, you have a plan for fixing the rest of them. And then you go, okay, you've got your accessibility statement. So how do you stop this from happening in the future? You need to future-proof. If you're not future-proofing, you're a point in time accessible, and in a year's time, you're going to have to go through it all again. Okay? Or every 6 months. Then you're going to have to look at training staff. So now you're not going to want just that 10% of your staff trained. This is a compliance training piece. And are you going to train them on better use of the platform, or to ensure the content is done? And so Microsoft and Google have awesome training on how to use, like, for example, Microsoft Word, Excel, and PowerPoint to create really good accessible content. So you look to the suppliers and go, where is your training material? And the same with Google. And both of them, if you're using their online systems, can do embedded subtitling when you're doing presentations, and that's great. Obviously, there's concerns the fact that they're doing voice processing, but these are the kind of things you look at that, and you might choose to swap a tool and go, okay, let's stop using this product and use this one because its output is better and it has the training materials available for our staff. Your procurement might change because you're going, well, now, if we're going to renew our LMS, we want to make sure that it's an accessible platform, that when the content's created and accessible, it gets checked, and it stops problems happening. You need to use psychological nudging. One of the things we found was that, someone might put in www.lmspulse.com and then create a link from that text. And that's not good because you shouldn't really, because if you have one of your deep links, which the URL is quite long, that's going to be a problem, and I'll sort of tackle that later. But you need to make sure that your procurement deals with these kinds of things. And then testing. Just like you should be testing your backups, so probably on a monthly basis, make sure your backups are working. You should be testing your site for compliance on a regular basis. You need to have not just a once-off report, but you want to have something you can run again and again and again. And know that out of your 64 million QA checks, which was one of the sites we did some testing on there sometime last year.
64 million?
64 million QA checks. So we're using a big data, small data approach. Big data, analyze everything with all the different checks, and then find out what are the key things to focus on. But you need to keep on testing. Okay?
Wow.
So,
is there maybe this is an obvious question, but in that process there, you go through, the one thing I didn't sort of see you say specifically is then creating that process where any new content would be checked for compliance before it then goes live? Is that a typical?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's what I mean. So when someone tries to do that link, you actually should tell them, hey, no, that's not a suitable link. And what we do with our platform is that we actually then tell them what link it should be. So if it goes to, like, not in Ireland, with one of our national broadcasters, RTE.ie. So, and that's Radio Telefícero. So we would actually go to the webpage, grab the name of the website, and suggest them to use the name of the website rather than the URL as the link text. So it's using that nudging and helping. The platform should be supporting them. And you tell them there, well, hey, if you want to find more information about why this is important, click here, that's great. But you want to stop them doing mistakes. And you want to help them with what they're doing.
Sure, and I'm sure that 90% of those mistakes, just as you described, that form local validation is something you can build in.
No, absolutely. I mean, like where we hope to be, and within a year and a half, we hope to be the equivalent of like a Grammarly for accessibility, where it's just focusing on that.
Cool.
Thing. Like more people know what Grammarly is now. If you've ever been to YouTube, you've probably seen their advertised with, I don't know, 1,000 times.
If not, their phones are listening right now, and it's being put into the browser or whatever. So yes,
absolutely. They're going Grammarly. Okay, yeah, we'll have to do some advertising on that website. Maybe you'll get a sponsor out of it. So, but it's about
Grammarly is not a sponsor of the summit.
No, I'm joking. But maybe they should be.
Maybe they should be. Yeah.
So when you look at procurement, and then you look at, well, so how do I know if my Moodle site is fully accessible? So it's a bit of a layer cake. And this is really important to understand because you can't just say, hey, Moodle is accessible and it is designed accessibly, right? But there's so much more involved. So when someone is accessing the piece of content at the very end, let's say reading a forum post by a student, replying to a forum post by a teacher. So we take that as an example. So firstly is the device. Now they will probably have a device that's configured correctly or could be configured correctly to support whatever needs they happen to have. So if they have color issues, you can configure Windows and your iPad and so on to support that. Or if you need to have larger text, you can configure that at that device level as well. And then if you're using different browsers have things built in automatically. You probably know like Control Plus will make font size bigger. And that's important because then you make sure that your theme and your CSS doesn't lock the size and allows this relative sizing. And then you have the application framework. It's like the Moodle code base. It has to be designed accessibly to have all the screen reader and hooks, the ARIA things, and so on within the system, so people can navigate around it when they're not seeing it. Then you've got a theme. Someone might have a really accessible platform and come up with a theme, and I've seen them on some of the accessibility discussion lists where the theme just isn't accessible. They've introduced this really cool looking navigation which just doesn't work with screen readers or other. It requires a mouse, it's all hover, that kind of thing. Then you've got your site configuration. You might have set it up in such a way that it's not consistent, it's just confusing to navigate. There's not predictability involved and all of these issues. The same with course navigation. If every single course is different, if all of your courses are essentially 10-week-long courses, and Some of them might have that set up in 3 areas, going here's your resources, here's your videos and your slide decks. In the middle here is your assignments, and at the end here is your extra activities. Or some might have it laid out by week, or some might have it just laid out by subjects within that whole thing. There might be 5 of them. All of this, in lack of consistency, is a challenge. It's not predictable to navigate. If I was to say, go and find your week 1 slides in each of your courses, if they're not somewhat in the same place, named in some sort of convention, then everybody will find it hard to find. Yeah? And it is everybody that's important. And then you've got the teacher content. So when they actually put in content and sort of go down into here, it's sort of like they're adding in HTML and files. So the files might not be, so they might have scanned the document and then upload a PDF. So it's basically an image. It's not, it isn't text, so it's not going to be as accessible. Or they might have uploaded a PowerPoint where there's no headings and no tagging and no bookmarking, or a PDF. I recently went through creating a new Moodle guide for Universal Design for Learning. It's on the Brickfield site. And we created with InDesign. And we had to use both InDesign and Adobe Acrobat DC to then go through and create all the bookmarking and the correct reading order to ensure that PDF was as accessible as I could do it, to make sure all the images, reader designated decorative or had an alt tag. And that doing it the first time, that was intense. I hadn't used InDesign in ages. But it's important to do. But once you've learned it and practiced it a few times, you get faster quite quickly through it. And then you've got all the stuff within the HTML. You might be creating that forum post and adding in links or adding in images or embedding video. And these are the kind of things. And then the students do the same. So your platform has to really help the users. If you want the students to not be creating inaccessible content for the other students or even for assessment, what if the lecturer has a disability? And so the content coming to them from the student should be accessible. So these are the kind of things that you have to do. So you've got these layers. This is not just just press a button and it works. But you need to look at all of these. You probably need to look at all of these for all of your platforms and figure it out. And then when you look at each one of these, you sort of go, okay, so learners have a particular set of things they can do. I'm not going to go through them all, but the idea is, what training do you give these? Do you instruct them that, hey, here is your information about how to use Word, and if you're going to be sharing these documents with other students, you need to be inclusive, and so make sure you go through and learn how to create accessible content. And it's that kind of thing. And the same within the LMS. Then with instructors, you sort of go, what percentage of teachers have actually had training, either awareness or compliance training? And then you sort of go, okay, so what about their feedback? It's you need to be able to give feedback. This isn't about beating people up. It's about supporting them and helping them and go, hey, these are some of the issues that have been identified. This is how we can solve them, either for you or with you, or how you can solve them. And some of the institutions we talk to is really about giving that instructor the feedback so that they can learn and ensure that they're doing it well going forward. They're not doing this because they want to. They're doing it because probably they just don't know. And so it's about education. It's about support. And very much, because they're in a work environment, it's about performance support. Okay? It's not because training is a once-off. I mean, if you had a training session a few years ago about something, how much would you remember now?
Right.
But performance support is when they're doing something that they have the information available. And so within some of our reports that we create, we've got links to PDF going, hey, this is the do's and don'ts of images or of links or of layout. So this is important to provide the information at the point of doing something. Then you've got the course setup, the same kind of thing about agreeing, not mandating, but agreeing a standard maybe within a specific school or a department so they can understand what they're doing. And that they can have a consistency, but yet each one has their own bit of personality. You don't want to enforce it, but they just understand that this is the legal requirements. Okay? From one hand, you're going, we want to support you, you need to get here. Okay?
And I want to
maybe.
I want to point out to everybody who's in the session right now that there's another speaker named Christian Garrett who has his entire talk is around how do you create sort of the standards for instructors to make sure that every course looks the same, every course follows the same naming conventions, etc. That's his entire talk. So it's a really good companion to this particular recommendation.
Yeah, I think that's really important because it's both of them. So some of them call it like a baseline, course baseline, that it should have a document about the curriculum. It should, and so you should search the course. There's the word curriculum used as one of the links to something. It should have an assessment schedule, and so on. So it should have information about the presenter, the facilitator, or the lecturer, that kind of thing. Because you want to make sure that the students are supported with their sites and whatever are predicted. That'll be a really interesting one. I'm certainly looking forward to that. Where's he from?
He's from BIPC, so BP. I'm totally apologize that I'm forgetting the exact college he is right now, but he's from Louisiana. Okay. But I'll do back to you on that.
Well, certainly looking forward to seeing that. And then you've got the site level. So you've also got things like, well, how have the admins, and ironically or unintentionally, technical administrators often have some of the biggest decisions and make the biggest decisions about how the platform is used for teaching, by what they turn on and off, or how they allow structures to be done. And a lot of them will engage with their academic institution to ensure that the decisions being made are appropriate. You do need to be double checking them. Are all the correct settings done? All the defaults correct? You don't want to have, for example, a lecturer constantly having to change the same setting. It could be a default setting of the platform, but no one's ever let the admin know this should be the correct default setting. Because it's just about making it much easier for everyone. Like, these are the features that should be turned on. These are the features turned on. So,
and it's real easy. It's real easy for, and everybody's experienced this as well, especially in a large organization, for IT, right, the admin to be the gatekeeper for what does get turned on and off, or you can do that or you can't do that, rather than really being a service that's supporting the the instructor community or the student community. So I think that that's a really important point, that you need to have leadership step in there and say, we're going to work together, and our goal is student outcome here. So
yeah, absolutely. And years ago, I remember the IT department being called the Department of No. But
oh yeah, I didn't want to go there, but yeah, right. Yeah.
Oh well, hey, you know what? I'm sorry, IT department. I think that's unfair, because I think that it's actually that there isn't coordination between them. Because the IT department will look at things and go, we want to de-risk everything. We don't want to be if we're responsible for having mission critical platform up and running all the time, well, we're going to not take any risks.
Sure, yeah. We're not going to put 1,000 places it can break, right? Of course. Yeah.
Exactly. But then there needs to be an inclusion in discussion that it is a pedagogical platform too. And I think that then when you come with branding and teaming, it's the same kind of thing. I remember there was one institution, I will not mention, which their admin refused to put any customizations or any teaming on it. And I don't know pretty much any Moodle sites that are just vanilla out of the box.
Wow, I was just going to say
that's a platform.
That's bold. Yeah, I was just going to say it's like saying, hey, we're going to buy a car, but we're not going to paint it.
Or actually, we're going to buy a car, but the roof was optional.
You don't need to.
I know you're living in Ireland. But hey, you know what? The roof was optional, so when it rains, you can't drive the car. So Moodle is a platform. There's all of these amazing extra features being built by the community and by different companies. But you're supposed to bend Moodle to your own cultural needs. And so having a team and having your brand properly applied, but then they need to check that their brand, when they're creating one, is accessible in the first place. In one institution or organization I was chatting to, their colors weren't. So that's a problem. And that does lead to sort of how we're going about doing this. I mean, so in leaving Moodle HQ, which again was a privilege to work with Martin and the team, it was absolutely great. But one of the things was we wanted to start working with some very specific areas that weren't just about the core product, but with in the sort of what you call the value-added services, or the services around Moodle as well, integrating extra pieces. So one of the things that we're working on is tackling this problem. lawsuit every business art. That's a lot. A lot of these don't sort of finish in court, and some of them sort of drag on 5 or 6 years. Institutions who have got sued over the fact that their videos didn't have any subtitles, but they have so many videos that it was just going to cost so much that some of them might just take. Noodle to your own cultural needs. And so having a theme and having your brand properly applied, but then they need to check that their brand, when they're creating one, is accessible in the first place. In one institution or organization I was chatting to, their colors weren't. So that's a problem. And that does lead to sort of how we're going about doing this. I mean, so in leaving Moodle HQ, which again was a privilege to work with Martin and the team, that's been great. One of the things was we wanted to start working with some very specific areas that weren't just about the core product, but with in the sort of what you call the value-added services, or the services around Moodle as well, and integrating expertise. So one of the things that we're working on is tackling this problem. And in the US, there's a lot of civil rights lawsuits each year, and there's going to be nearly 2,000 in the year alone. Is one of the stats that's over there. Like one lawsuit every business art. That's a lot. A lot of these don't sort of finish in court, and some of them sort of drag on 5 or 6 years. Institutions who have got sued over the fact that their videos didn't have any subtitles, but they had so many videos that it was going to cost so much that some of them might just take them down. But then going forward, they start doing it correct. I think that's the balance, because when those videos are being created, it might not have been so difficult at the time or so expensive to do it then, make sure it was in the budget to ensure subtitles if it had been a requirement. But going forward now, they're more aware of this. And although in Europe it hasn't been this way, it's going to start being that way for people who don't adhere to the directive, because suddenly, like with GDPR, it's taken a year and a half for individuals to become more aware of their rights. As more people are aware of their rights, they're going to start questioning them. And also different representative bodies are going to start challenging organizations. But as we talked about earlier, if the platform doesn't give you the information, it is technical. I mean, understanding HTML, I was in a meeting just 2 days ago with 3 people who were using Moodle for putting in content, and one of them had used Moodle before as a student. None of them knew what WCAG was, and that's okay. From a technical point of view, they didn't know what HTML was either. It was like, so it's, if they're just creating content, they're used to Microsoft Word and browsers. That's it. They don't know the technology behind, so the system has to support it. But they should also be aware. And then you will struggle to stay compliant. You might be compliant now, but you need to constantly get that feedback going forward. So, as we talked about, there are going to be multiple instructors in every institution or organization creating content in your LMS. And you have all of these different systems and people creating it, and they're not all going through one testing process. So how on earth do you tackle this going forward? And for the lecturer, they're going, well, I'm trying my best, but how do they know that the stuff is compliant? It's and especially when a lot of them are using maybe some third-party sites and stuff, and they read that, they've got an accessibility statement, but have they read it all? And it might be a bit too legal rather than being in simple text. And so they might say one thing, but if they haven't tested it, it might not be accessible. And so having a testing process, would you risk your business good name on, or your institution's good name on the word of a third party, even if you can sue them, even if the contract you agree with, right? Would you risk your good name and not test their platform to be the level of what they say it is? I certainly think institutions should do testing on third-party things before they pay the money. Okay, so that should be something that if people are going into an RFP and they say, hey, well, we are these to this level of accessibility, here's a list of things you can go ahead and check. So that should be in a budget for handling the sort of tender process, I think. So you've got that EU directive, which is all about improving accessibility. It's about having this extra monitoring and reporting. So people have to be able to report on where they are themselves. So time is ticking, especially in the States with all the lawsuits, and then in Europe with the directives. And with this current pivot, and they use that word pivot a lot, but with this rush to online delivery, some people say it's like online learning. Well, a lot of it's remote learning, because we're not all just working from home. Some people are basically locked in their houses, having to try and work and cope with having maybe all the family there and everything else.
I was just going to say, man, I've said this on many of the summits. I mean, I'm trying to make sure that you can't hear them right now, but I've got, 3 kids in my house with me, and so they're all learning online. And so this is just a new reality in this space right now.
Yeah, it is. And so, but accessible content becomes even more important. But yet, when you see these institutions adopting tools that are not accessible or are not, let's say, very strong on data protection. I mean, we've all heard about a certain video calling platform which had security issues and privacy issues coming out left, right, and center. We will talk about the fact that we're currently using it. However, it is something which this is important. This is important to deal with, and accessibility and the content being accessible for everybody is important, and not just having streaming. If you've got 5 kids or 3 kids all trying to do online learning and streaming huge pieces of content and videos, that's problematic. And so being able to download and have a transcript available, maybe, or subtitles, all of these things become quite important. They've always been, but now they're getting more important in this crazy pandemic that we're in. So what we've gone about it, so we've implemented a solution that automates as much as we possibly can and provide support for lecturers. So we look at having this finding approach. So it's find, fix, and future-proof. And what we mean by finding is, where possible, we've automated the analysis of content within Moodle. We started off with all the HTML content into the quiz questions. If you think about even a multi-choice question, you have the name, you have the description of it, you have the actual question text, then you have each option, each of the answers, and then you might have specific feedback for each answer. So you've got maybe 15 to 20 different pieces of content that may or may not be accessible. And then you have to run all of the different questions against all the different tests against them. So, because they might be using color, they might be in the text, they might be using links, and they might be using images or videos or layout, or using tables in a program. All of the different things they can do wrong, they can do it in most of those fields. Any HTML area, I remember the data protection consultant we used when I was at Moodle, and they talked about the idea of, it was like, it's a text area coming from, that anything can go in there. So you have to assume that there might be private data or personal data added in there by a student in a forum post. It's the same when you come to accessibility, that in that HTML area, they could have put anything in, right? They could just put in raw HTML and try and override it. Do inline CSS, whatever it might be. So you have to check it. So we go in and check all of that. That's what our 64 million QA checks came from, because, well, there's a lot of stuff to check, and if you've got 10,000 courses, you're going to have a lot of content. So we produce those reports at a site level or a category or a program. So mathematics year 1, the program lead can look at that and go, okay, so most of my courses are like 95% compliant, then this one here is at 80. So let's go and have a look at that and see what we can do to whatever it will be to try and solve it. But it also gives some, not just if they are compliant or not, but then also what is wrong and which parts are wrong. Are assignments supposed to be the problem, or is it text or images? So, and then we can give like a view like this, where we have over here on the left, you've got assignments at 60 of them, and of which around 50 of them actually get passed, 10 of them have 1 or more problems. So you can get an indicative view across your course or that selection of courses of where things are going right and going wrong. Clearly, for some of these, it's very little problems, and for some of them, there's a lot of problems. But also then the teacher can have a view of, and we're using both color, icon, and text here to indicate something has passed or something hasn't, so like a heat map. But also then we have this little app on the side, which gives them sort of the totals of, and we group all of these tests together in different areas, so that it's looking at sort of images or might be layout or links and so on, so they can understand that. I think this is key. You want to support both the administrator and the actual teacher. Because we're in this performance support, this helps the teacher know I've got problems in that one area. And then, so got a teacher, they've got 1,000 problems. What are you going to do about it? Well, that's where you have to help. You have to help them fix it or fix it for them. So the area we're looking at, and we've built a selection of wizards which help them to automate either both automate fixes or take them through some pages that will allow them to make those subjective decisions about what to do or what not to do. So they're sort of workflow wizards that they can go through those issues one at a time rather than finding them. If I told you you've got 10 issues with images in the course, and potentially you've got 1,000 images, you'd want to just be able to go through those 10 images, fix the alt tags in them, and then that's it done, rather than going and finding where they are. But then, so you've done that. So you've got your automated stuff done, you've got the subjective stuff done. Future proofing is key. How do you stop it happening again? Well, outside of that training and all of that other stuff, which has to happen anyway, we're looking at, well, we've built a better editor. We've taken Atto and we've forked it. We've then gone through and made improvements to it and fixed any issues that we found. We've brought in some of the common community plugins that are used to add better predictability and standards in how they use it. And then we've also started tackling other features within Moodle as well to actually improve them. And sometimes something might be technically accessible, so it's usable by someone, for example, with a screen reader, but it's just taking 3 days to do a task instead of 1. And that's just because it's a lot of tabbing back and forth and so on. So sometimes we will build an alternate tool. So it's not always that way is usable for someone with a mouse and who can see the interface and so on. But then you have something which you might need to, for example, use Excel to bulk upload stuff. So we have a bulk upload for students and groups for within courses for a teacher rather than using the group creating tool through the interface. And so they're the kind of things that we've been looking at and trying to solve those problems, but also providing performance support. We're going to be launching a 4-week MOOC, essentially, on a course where people can, all of their staff can go on this course every month and take different modules if they want to learn more about it. And that's just an example of some of the editor kind of things that we're sort of looking at doing and adding in stuff like character count or word count, being able to import from Microsoft Word easily. Some of these are really good community features, but we feel that for our clients, they need to have them. So it's like packaging those together in that respect. And that's an example of what we're image changing. So this here in standard Moodle is just a text box, small text box. So we've made it a text area, we've added in character counting. This in standard Moodle says description not necessary. So for someone who doesn't know what WCAG is or accessibility is, saying this image is decorative only, if they read it, will make them think more. It's more of a nudge. And that's one of the key things that we're trying to do here. It's about supporting them at the point of when they're doing something. And then this was just one of the things here. Someone has highlighted a URL down here, BBC, but we've gone off and found this is actually BBC homepage that they're linking to.
Nice.
Or making suggestions. So it's just about supporting them at the point of creating their content. And they're just 2 examples. And ultimately, if they tackle this, they're going to have higher quality content available for everyone, and they're hopefully going to reduce their lawsuit risks and ultimately reduce costs. Because if content's created available for everyone, then they're not going to have to do these specific. Okay, we need to do something extra now for somebody, but it's just always going to be done. These just become part of the day-to-day content. So that's that really, and this is myself and my wife Karen, who is the developer behind what we do. But anyway, so I'll just stop sharing there.
Awesome. Yeah, all of that, that not only your slide, but all that information will be here below this on the video. One piece of accessibility. So the burning question in my mind is, we've got people who are in the summit right now who are not Moodle specific. When are your tools going to be available to, the Canvas community, the D2L community, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, there are obviously some other tools out there which work with all of them already, but we are coming at from a slightly different point of view. And one of the things that we will also have available in May is actual sort of things like that. When a teacher uploads a video, they can click a button and get their subtitles generated, or edit their subtitles online as well. And we think that's really important. That's part of the future proofing, you know. It's and that'll be one of our fix wizards as well, I think. Well, we're working very closely with Google first. Google has most of the LMS in the world, especially in higher ed. So we're working with Martin and Google first. So once we tackle that, we might start looking at others. But the second one we've already looked at it again is sort of the open edtech. So maybe looking at WordPress, and there are again things available for WordPress, but it's a slightly different approach that they take, or Drupal or one of those. But it's initially all our time and effort for the next while is going to be on Moodle. Moodle is used from everything from schools, a single trainer, the whole way up to international companies, governments, and like in Ireland, the national training body, which is called SUS, they use Moodle for delivering their courses. And one of the interesting things was that just recently, so this is available to everyone who's unemployed, and their courses were available for that. And because of the pandemic, in Ireland, we just added, I think, an extra 550,000 people to needing income support for just places closing down. And
Sure.
That's temporary. But then they make immediately available all of their courses for free. Everyone in Ireland. And there's probably similar going on in lots of places, but they use Moodle. So it is really important for all of those. So we're going to work strongly with Moodle, and as I said, we were privileged to be able to work there. Both Karen and I had worked at Moodle for 3.5 years. So certainly it's great to work with Martin and Moodle to help tackle these issues, and then also help future-proof. And our second area that we're going to be looking at after accessibility is teaching quality monitoring and evaluation. So looking at teaching patterns within courses, that baseline concept that your other presenters
Sure.
One of the areas that we're working on. It's a similar philosophy. You have a set of rules, but the institution decides what those rules are, rather than them being technical accessibility rules. So that's where we're going next.
Fantastic. So I want to, again, for many of the people who are in the room right now listening to this, there's a collective weight already on their shoulder. Especially because of the COVID crisis right now, so many people are in this summit right now just being like, how do I even get online, to get my students, get my learners going on there. And this is just now, you just put that in a layer cake. If you want to put anxiety in a layer cake, you just put another one on top of them, right? But where I'm going with this is, from my understanding of your presentation, this is like any other skill, is like any other muscle, right? The first time you go work out, or that first time you ride a bike, you're going to fall off. The next time, you're going to get a little better. And, by the fourth or fifth time, I hate to use the cliche, but it's like riding a bike. You're going to be able to go and be like, oh, hey, you know what? I know I need to tag my images. I know that I need to, obviously now I know from now on, I need to make my, annotate my links when they come up the page. And these things, especially because if you're an instructor, there's going to be a finite universe probably that you're going to operate in, right? And so tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm getting it that this is a skill you can build, and especially if you're thinking future-proof, it's a worthwhile skill to build because it's super important. And ultimately, this isn't about compliance. This is about inclusiveness, right?
Yeah, I think, it's been about compliance beforehand, but it is now, with the push to being fully online, people realize actually it's just about making it accessible for everybody. Because those people who have low bandwidth, having a text version of that video so they don't have to stream it is a good thing. And maybe there's all of those kind of issues that you mentioned. I think starting off, when most people who start cycling a bicycle, they start with stabilizers. And if you're working, for example, with consulting, specifically around accessibility to training, great. But if you've also got working with your Moodle partner or whatever service provider you're working with for other LMSs, they are your stabilizers. Make sure that you have in your budget, in your procurement process, that there is sufficient stabilizers, hand-holding to take people through and understand and configure the system in the correct way, so that the staff don't go in there with misconceptions about how and what they can do and how they should do it. And if you have regular assessments, regular refreshers around that, that's going to be really key. And that's why the training course that we're doing, although it refers to Moodle, it's just actually about accessibility and UDL. So it's something which there's a load of stuff out there, but sometimes that's a bit overwhelming. So we're having a facilitated course that's going to be delivered. And that's about having people, whenever they feel the need, actually, I have a bit of time this month, I'm going to jump in there and learn. So it's about supporting your staff. But then at some stage, once they have got into it, they'll wonder why they just weren't doing it all the time.
Sure.
You know? And one of the most common issues that you see with images, for example, is, let's say your image is image.png, which is terrible naming for a file in the first place. I always like putting in date and then what it is. Then the alt text as well, often you see just they type in image. And clearly, if it is decorative, it doesn't have an alt text. It just is tagged as decorative. So you should say what it is, like a dog sitting on the ground looking at the sunshine, or a dog jumping around trying to bite a balloon that's floating away. It should be descriptive of actually what it is. And this is a muscle that you will just, once you get into this process, you're just going to do it day to day.
Gavin, thank you so much for your presentation today. This is it's an important topic, and like I've said to many other speakers at the summit, one of the things I love about hosting this thing is I'm learning so much, even as we go along. What I love about this particular issue, though, is that it is technical and it is important, but at the same time, it's like so many of these other topics, it's driving us towards that inclusiveness. It's actually driving us towards a place where everybody has the opportunity to partake in this learning process. So thank you for presenting today, and we'll make sure everybody knows about how to get in a hold of you, and wish you well.
Thank you for the opportunity. I do think you're right. It is something which it is just about including everybody and giving them all an equal opportunity to learn and engage. Thank you so much for your time.